and welcome to Clayton. This is Clayton from Orange in regional New South Wales, and Clayton just found me on Twitter. I don't know how. How did you find me on Twitter?
I think we commented on the same thread. It was as simple as that. And then you said, you basically pestered me into submission. Come be on my podcast. I remember being a bit reluctant, but here we are.
If nothing, I can hustle. So I pushed you for it, eh? I'm pleased. I'm so thrilled because I sent a little pre-questionnaire out. You sent it back, and I'm like, this is cool as. I love meeting people from all over the world. I love meeting people who've got really different backgrounds from me. I come from New South Wales originally, albeit city. I'm from Sydney, albeit in Melbourne these days. But you've got a radically different kind of history and past from me, and a lot of what you do is incredibly interesting in light of what's going on economically for us at the moment. So I know you're in mining and mining for gold, and we're going to get to that because gold is a really kind of fascinating parallel to Bitcoin. You're also in agriculture, which is incredibly meaningful, or you've got a background in agriculture, which is really meaningful in today's economy with supply chains and shortages that we've never seen before, and serious shortages in places like Sri Lanka. And we've got energy crises going on, and the big problem with Australia is that we're a really big, vast country with agriculture a long way from supermarkets in the city. And so energy becomes a real issue. Fuel is a major concern. So I'm sure you'll have kind of ideas on all of that, but let's start from the beginning. And I would love to simply ask you a little bit about your upbringing. You may be a little bit older than some of the people I've interviewed so far. I don't want to make any assumptions. And which means you may have a longer and broader and more diverse background than some. And I'm curious. So tell me, I think you told me you started regional New South Wales. There's been a bit of city living, and now you're back to regional. Yeah. So give us the potted history, Clayton.
I grew up on a family farm in a tiny little town called Condobolin, which is right in the centre of New South Wales. And my family grew wool and wheat.
Yep.
And that was our livelihood. There was all the usual sort of farm experiences, I suppose, as part of that, livestock and dogs and horses and motorbikes and all that kind of bush lifestyle, I suppose.
Yeah.
And all of the learning that goes with that. You get a very particular handle on how life works if you work, or if you're exposed day to day, I think, with agriculture or with nature even. It doesn't necessarily need to be agriculture.
Yeah.
And I was there with, I have a younger brother and my parents. My grandparents were involved when I was very small. And then at 12, I was sent off to boarding school in Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
For 6 years, I did high school in Sydney, which was interesting because...
Why was that? And where was it?
I suppose it was because my parents thought there were better opportunities.
Yeah.
The town I grew up in is very small. It's 2,500 or 3,000 people.
Yeah.
And they're all involved in primary industry in one way or another, whether there's a little bit of mining in the area, but it's largely agricultural.
Yeah.
And spending your life in a place like that is very fine if you intend to be in mining or agriculture. But if you don't know what's out there, you're not going to look. And I suppose, like any parent, my parents just wanted to give us some healthy exposure to the world, and that was probably a good way of doing it.
Yeah.
It was a very big school. The primary school that I went to in Condobolin was I'd imagine it was 300 or 400 kids across 6 years, so it wasn't tiny.
Yeah.
There was certainly a healthy kind of social network, but most of my classmates' parents did very similar things. There was only sort of so many lifestyles or occupations represented in my classmates' parents. And then when I went to school in Sydney, that broadened immensely. There were kids from all over the world there. There were kids that had travelled all over the world. There were parents that had done things that I'd never heard of, and and sometimes I met a lot of them, and sometimes they took me on leave into their houses and stuff, which I went and experienced things that I wouldn't have done had I stayed in Congo, sailing on Sydney Harbour or walking in the Blue Mountains, or just the foods they ate, like the takeaway at the corner of their street was something that I couldn't have eaten, in Condo. So
which school was it? Just out of
I
interest.
went to the King's School.
Oh yeah, North Shore somewhere.
It's in North Parramatta. It's in
North Parramatta. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And back in those days, Parramatta would have been nowhere near as developed as it is now.
Yeah, no, it's quite different. I was in Parramatta not very long ago, and it's changed a lot. It's it's actually really nice now. It was interesting then, but it's a real sort of hub of Sydney now. It's really thriving. It's an interesting part of town.
Yeah, right. Sure. Okay, I haven't been there for years. I should.
It's a fantastic place to eat. My God, Parramatta, unbelievable. And then coming home from boarding school to the holidays, and I guess I felt almost like I had to meet my family, because I'd changed so much. 3 months when you're 15 years old is quite a lot can happen to yourself, and things you learn and how you develop. And as I matured, I guess my parents would change. Our relationship developed a lot, and they would start to tell me less about what to do and more, put your shoes on, get your socks on, get on the school bus, when you're 6. And now it was like, well, what are you going to do when you leave school? What did you do? Well, my parents were both great travellers before they were married. And so I ended up hearing all these incredible stories of what adventure was like for them in the 60s and 70s. And because they came from, Mum grew up in the house I grew up in, and Dad grew up in a farming family as well. Right. And so they did some pretty incredible stuff as young adults. And so I got sort of amped up. I've been exposed to kids from, Malaysia and Hong Kong, and some of them from Europe, Yeah. And then I was hearing about what they were doing on school holidays and stuff. And then I came home and I was learning that my parents were quite worldly, particularly from my perspective. Mm. I was thinking to myself, it must have been percolating in me, because I don't remember not assuming that I was going to travel a lot when I was capable of it. Yeah. I don't remember any question in my mind. It was like, well, that's going to happen. It was just so. I was okay at school. I found it quite interesting. I didn't really apply myself. I got quite bored, but I coasted through and got acceptable marks, and didn't find it. I didn't really bust myself to get an incredible mark, but I showed up and took it seriously, and I was middle of the pack, and that was fine. And then I went off to university in Armidale. I went and enrolled in Bachelor of Commerce. Yeah. And that was, I went immediately after finishing high school, and that was probably a mistake, because I was just too young in the mind. I wasn't mature enough to kind of handle what university I wasn't mature enough to get the very best from university. And I ended up getting basically kicked out after 3 years. I was bored. I was capable of doing the work. I just found it really disinteresting, and I couldn't make myself sit at my desk and send me assignments. There was just something inside me that I just wasn't willing to do it. I'd read the text and understand the material, and then instantly mentally screw it up in a ball and throw it over my shoulder and just go and do something else. I was bored.
Yeah,
And
right.
that was a terrible way to be.
And the way they taught commerce back then was it was boring, you know?
Yeah.
I did economics at uni. It was boring as batshit. It was.
Yeah, look, I didn't mind some of the economics. I did 3-unit economics in high school.
Right.
And I found that quite interesting, but quite limited. And then the academic side of it kind of irritated me a little bit. I thought, why aren't we not applying this in the world? Why are we not like looking at these economic models in the context of geopolitics? And that frustrated me. They wanted to.
Wow, you were thinking about that back then.
Oh yeah. Because I had this big worldview. You know, I knew kids whose parents were moving to Australia because Hong Kong was about to be taken, taken back by the Chinese. And I remember thinking, well, when did I finish school? I finished school in '96.
Yeah.
So, the 100 years of British rule in Hong Kong was rapidly coming to a close, and China was the whole world knew that China was going to be a real force in the early 21st century. We could see that then. And the internet was just starting to really permeate through. I don't remember using the net much at school, but in first year uni in '97, the internet was simple and sort of clumsy, but it was definitely something. We could all see as undergrads that the internet is really going to be a big part of our future. And that was a thing. And then that with sort of I would go right off the topics that I was set for, particularly economics and economic history. And I would start just wandering around on the internet in 1997, 98, looking for what was being written in the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, or they didn't really have translate services like in real time in the browsers then, but I would try and figure out what different geopolitical events around the world would mean for me or mean for the future. I was just trying to piece it together. I didn't really have an agenda. I wasn't trying to figure out if a particular course of events was going to take place. I guess I was just interested, and it was like drinking from a fire hydrant.
If there's a theme coming through already in the few kind of interviews that I've done so far, this thing of a need to understand, like really independent thinking, critical thinking, needing to understand the bigger picture, needing to understand kind of the what's going on and why, what's driving it all, how does it all fit together, seems to be like a common theme so far. I'll be, I mean, it's not a big sample size yet, but I'm interested to hear you say that, because whilst you say your parents were quite worldly, it was quite a small town upbringing. And it could have been, and a lot of people in those kinds of environments have no desire to go out and see the world, no desire to, not really terribly curious about the world beyond their immediate town and making things work for their family. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's really an interesting case. You're an interesting case study, Clayton.
I've been told similar things before, believe it or not.
All right, so you went exploring and you started delving, and Hong Kong sort of was part of, kicking it off, because that came up in '99. That was 1999, yeah.
I was kicked out in November '99. I forget what the academic phrasing they used, but they very kindly and nicely said, "We invite you to reconsider your academic future." So off I went, and I had a black sheep uncle. I have a black sheep uncle. He probably wouldn't appreciate being called a black sheep uncle, but he marches to his own beat.
It would probably be a compliment to him.
Yeah. He fully admit he marches to his own beat, but he was working in the film industry. He was on set as a crew member, and he rang me one day and said, he's quite a lot younger than my father. He's my father's youngest brother. I think there's 15 years or something between them.
Oh, wow.
So he was about halfway between my father and I in age. And he said, look, I understand you're not crowd favourite at home. Why don't you come and do a movie with me? And I said, well, look, that sounds incredible. I don't know anything about it. He goes, look, you'll figure it out. Can't just get yourself to Prague and I'll give you a job. So I got myself to Prague in the Czech Republic with a brand new passport, still with the ink wet on it. And I just showed up in Prague and bluffed my way into the studio lot. And my uncle was the key grip, and he's the head of his department. And so I made a bad movie for 12 weeks in Prague.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Where do we track down this movie?
I don't know what it was released as, but I don't know. Maybe you are familiar with a little show that used to be on the ABC 1,000 years ago. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was called Monkey Magic. I don't know if you ever remember that. It's a little, I think it was based on like a Chinese legend or a Chinese fairy tale.
Yeah, I wondered if that was it.
Yeah.
I actually think I have seen it, and I think my husband was a bit of a fan, funnily enough. I'm sure
a lot of people are fans of it.
Yeah.
So we made the film I was on was like a 3-part miniseries adaptation in English of that, and it was
cool.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, it was crazy kitsch, sort of low impact martial arts. It was fun. It was good.
That's great.
It was good fun. And I was basically a backpacker, but I was making and I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was making enough money, and I could see Prague and meet people from around the world and learn some new stuff. And I made a movie, and I saw how movies get made. That was that was a big sort of, that left a real impact on me.
And living in Prague, like, did you get to see much of it, or were you just on set every day? Were there people from all over the world?
Well, I was there for 3 or 4 months, so I saw Prague pretty well. But I was working 5 days a week.
Yeah.
So there's an immense studio complex at Prague called Barrandov Studios, and there was a lot of stuff being made there at the time. I was just involved in one production, and there was probably 200 people on that crew. Like, it was a pretty big show.
Yeah.
And Prague was only the studio component. I think they shot in Singapore or Malaysia or something before I joined the crew in Prague. But it was, I'd been playing with tractors and motorbikes since I was a kid. So I had some mechanical aptitude, and it was just like big Lego, The grips, I was a grip assistant, and the grips just build whatever the camera has to sit on to get the shot. So it was just like big Lego. And I picked it up. My uncle was there. He was making sure I didn't set anything on fire. And I just sort of contributed and kept my eyes open and my mouth shut and sort of bluffed my way through it. And it was terrific.
How awesome.
Yeah, it was like, and I sort of thought at the end of it, well, that was fun. And I took it seriously. I showed up every day. I wasn't probably always entirely without a hangover, but I did show up every day. And, I was 20 years old or 21 years old.
You didn't buy a bike and go touring around Prague after finished shooting? Go around Czechoslovakia on a motorbike?
Yeah, I wish I was on a motorbike. No, I was actually walking. I walked a lot. I really enjoyed it. Just exploring Prague. I remember, coming from a tiny little town in the middle of Australia, and then walking into the cathedral in the castle of Prague on top of the hill, and the flagstone of the cathedral was laid 1,000 years before I was there, and that blew me away. Like, it was just carved in the stone. Like, it was this was, and I walked into the cathedral, and the floor was just worn. It was hard stone, but the floor was worn from 1,000 years of footsteps, and that really stayed with me. I was like, whoa, like, this is a really old place. This is a really old place, and history was all around. One of the first clocks in Europe is the famous astronomical clock in the centre of town in the old square. It's 500 years old. The cathedral is 1,000 years old. The bridge across the river is, I'm going to guess from memory, maybe 700 years old. And this was just around me all the time. There was so much history. And, you go to villages not very far from Prague and you can see bullet holes from wars in the last 100 years and still in the buildings sometimes. And it's like,
what also strikes me about all of that, like there's this element, I suppose, what I tend to do when I'm in a place like that is I'm thinking about all the other footsteps of all the people who have wandered through there. But one of the things, as you're saying that really strikes me is the quality of engineering back then to put together a bridge 700 years ago that spans a river, however wide that, that river is. That which river is it going through?
I think it's the Vltava.
Okay.
There'll be Czech listeners one day that will crucify my pronunciation of that. Vltava, I think that's how they name the river. I don't know where it runs to. I must admit, I don't know Central European geography as well as I probably should. But
I mean, I've seen documentaries about how they used to build the churches and stuff, and how they first kind of, and how they held up the roofs and things. I mean, to me, it's just a miracle of
just sheer force of will.
Mental
we don't have any. They didn't have any of the sort of engineering that we have now.
Exactly. I mean, it's sort of like the building of the pyramids. It seems just as wild and complex to me.
Yeah,
the building of a pyramid. It just seems out of this world. But anyway, sorry, please keep going.
So after Prague, I did what all young Australians do when they don't know what to do. They go to London.
Yeah, of course. Been there, done that.
Yeah. So I washed up in London. I missed my plane to London by a month because I was just having a good time and forgot that the shoot was extended. And anyway, I missed the plane by a month and showed up in London, and I didn't know anyone and didn't really do very much of anything, and sort of floundered around until I found some Australians living in a squat in the East End. Like, I was not in the East End, it was in Peckham, and I was paying rent to someone, but I'm pretty sure we were stealing electricity and it wasn't enough rent, and there were a lot of us in there, so I'm calling it a squat. I don't know. Anyway, it kept the rain off my head, and I worked in a pub, and I saw in London, I remember going into central London and into the Mile and the city and seeing some incredible sort of wealth. There was London was the sort of center of the financial universe. And that was a big eye-opener. And it's a famous city, you grew up hearing about London. And then I would only...
So this is early 2000s now?
Yeah, this was about the time of the Sydney Olympics.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so summer 2000.
Yeah.
And it was, the whole place was cooking with gas. And then I could walk from, the wealthiest neighborhoods in Europe into my little squat, I was only walking distance away, I could walk it in 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing a family in the local kind of discount supermarket, and they had a shopping trolley and 3 kids in the shopping trolley and a sack of rice and a case of dog food. And I remember thinking, these people don't have a dog. And that,
wow,
yeah, that will stay with me forever. I didn't interact with them. I probably just visually kind of excused because the aisles were quite narrow, and I just brushed past them like another shopper.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
And it just made me think how desperate you have to be to leave whatever it is you grew up in, and wherever you came from, and you think, I'm going to move to another part of the world and I'm going to live at the very bottom tier of that society and raise my children and not know how I'm going to feed them. And I mean, they might have arrived in London the week before I saw them. I don't know. I didn't speak to them.
Yeah.
But I said, like, these people are having a red hot go. They're clearly not from around here. and they are eating rice and dog food in order to keep a roof over their heads and give their children a better life. And you can't see that when you've had a childhood like mine that was comparatively probably almost unlimited abundance, and then not have that stay with you. So that, and they were living in London, you know, it's a wealthy city. Everyone was, you know, most people were warm and dry most nights, I should think. And then there are people there who are living absolutely hand to mouth. And that, yeah, I never forgot that. I wondered where those people came from and what the life they left behind must have been like. And then I ran out of money. And when you run out of money and you live in a squat,
you're still working in the pub.
Yeah, well, the pub came soon. I did end up with a job in a pub, but I had some money from my job in Prague, and I was living pretty low because I wasn't sure how long this money could last. And then I inevitably ran out of money. And I pulled the washing machine apart because I heard coins jangling in it. Everyone else was at work, and I heard the washing machine jangling. So when it finished its thing, I pulled it apart and found £4.26, and I ate off that for a week. And because you could buy like a tin of spaghetti for 7 pence. So I lived off £4.26 a week. And then
that's impressive.
That ran out.
Like you could write a book just about that.
I mean, I was probably on the verge of scurvy by the end of the week. I wasn't actually eating mangoes, you know. It was pretty rough and ready food, but it was keeping me going. And then that money ran out, and I didn't have a thing, and I wasn't going to go home with my tail between my legs. So I said to myself, right, I hadn't eaten in a couple of days, and I was getting pretty hungry. And I said to myself, right, I'm going to eat today. I don't care what it takes. So I ironed a shirt, and I made myself as presentable as possible. Despite what that looks like right now, I can actually look quite presentable. And I told myself, right, I'm not coming back here until I eat. And I was getting pretty cagey. I don't know if you've ever been really quite hungry, but I've been living on a starvation ration for a week or more, and then I hadn't had anything to eat in 2 days. So I was really, my brain was working with a level of clarity that is really hard to achieve without that. I think when you get really truly hungry, your level of thinking, you think quite clearly, or you think you do anyway. I think you do. And I went and walked any shop front that was open for business. I knocked on the door and I was like, can I clean your windows? Can I sweep the floor? Can I unpack your boxes? Take your gut, whatever it was, whether it was a dry cleaner or a butcher shop it didn't matter. I went in and asked. And by sort of midday, I was really getting quite, because I was walking, I was burning calories doing that. And I was starting to think about the calorie deficit of the walking, and I was going to get home. And, I started looking for someone to mug. I was going to beat someone up so I could eat. And then I came to a pub and I went in and I said, look, I really want a job. I've pulled beers before. I can, I know a little bit about how to run a bar. I can definitely do this. And this lady behind the bar said, look, the boss will be back at 2. Come back then and speak to him. And I went off and went around the block just killing time and looking for other businesses to employ me. And I came back and the boss goes, oh, you want the job? And he was this old, East End business personality. He's quite well dressed, but a little bit flashy and some gold in the teeth and very, there's a
very English somehow.
Yeah. And he said, can you pour a beer? I said, yes, I can. And he goes, I'll have a pint. So I went around the bar and I pulled a pint for him. I gave it to him. And he goes, all right, you start tonight. Lisa will show you the ropes, the lady behind the bar. Don't mess this up. I was like, all right, thank you. And I said, is there any chance I could get something to eat?
Yeah, I was wondering if you
goes,
ask for an advance or for some food or something.
Ask Lisa. And I said, she goes, yeah, we finished the lunch service, go upstairs and see Billy. So I went up some stairs and I found the kitchen. And there's this massive Yorkshireman with a shaved head. And he was like scraping, he's finishing the lunch service. There was a huge stainless steel bowl of roast potatoes that were left over from lunch. I said, look, is there anything I can eat up here? I've just been employed. I start work tonight. He goes, oh, you want something to eat? I said, yeah, I haven't eaten in a couple of days. He goes, here, have some of these. And he just pushed this stainless steel bowl of roast potatoes at me. And it was the best meal to this day that I've ever had in my life.
I bet it was.
Oh man, I can't tell you. Anyway, I was very grateful to get that job.
I bet.
Yeah, I worked there for a few months, and then my black sheep uncle, rang me again, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm working in a pub." He said, "Is it good?" I said, "It's okay, like I'm having some fun, but it's not going to change my life." He goes, "Do you want to make another movie?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be unreal. Let's do that." He goes, "All right, a producer's going to ring you in a minute, say yes to everything he asks you, and do whatever he tells you." I was like, okay. And so I hung up the phone, and sure enough, like 2 minutes later, my phone rings, and I just started a shift at the pub. Like there was no one around. I was, hello? He goes, "Are you Clayton?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Can you operate, such and such equipment?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "Can you be in Luxembourg tomorrow morning?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "Great, your ticket's at Heathrow. Be there at 4:20. And woo! So I quit the pub and went home and packed my stuff, and I went to Heathrow in the morning, and lo and behold, there was a ticket there for me. So I flew to Luxembourg, which I'd never heard of before. And there's this guy at Luxembourg Airport holding up a sign that said Clayton. And I said, "I'm Clayton." He goes, "I'm Igor. We go." And there's this big, burly.
And his name was Igor. And his name was Igor.
His name was Igor.
The classic,
Yeah, Igor was about 6'5", and
hang on a moment. Hold fire just for a moment, Clayton. My PC isn't plugged in, and I didn't.
Sure.
Give me 2 seconds. I'm just plugging it in now.
Are you right?
Yep, keep going. Tell me about Igor.
So Igor takes me in this big black Mercedes to a 5-star hotel, like a big American hotel up on the hill. And I went from living in a squat to living in the top of a hotel, all in the space of about 12 hours. And I was like, whoa, here we go again. So I spent 3 or 4 years making movies in Luxembourg after that. Yeah. I made all sorts of crazy movies. I made them in French and German and English, and I mixed with people. There was the first movie I made there were 27 nationalities represented and 6 on-set working languages. Yeah. So that was a big kind of head explosion. And I loved it. I was very competent at it. I was not a world-class technician by any stretch, but I did well enough to avoid getting sacked. And I lived in Luxembourg for 3 or 4 years. I forget how long now, something like that. And had an incredible time, made some very firm friends. And then by about 23 or 4, I was starting to look around, and the people that were older than me, that they all had like probably 150% divorce ratio, and they were always living away from home. And they were making plenty of money, like they were living okay, but the family life was crucifying, because if you're at work, it's a 12-hour day plus travel, and you might be traveling to Mongolia or Antarctica to make the movie. Like, you don't know, you've got no control over your travel arrangements. So, and when of course you're working, you're financially, stable, but when you're not working, you don't want to do anything because you don't know when you're going to work again. Yeah. So I looked around and I thought, this has been fun, but this is not a long-term answer for me. So I came back to Australia and started to think about what my life would consist of then, and went back to uni
to study
business, commerce, something. By that point I figured out it really didn't matter what degree you held, as long as, if you want to do medicine or law, then you've got to do the applicable degree. But if you just wanted a job in corporate Australia, a piece of paper was enough to get you in the door, to try to start conversation. So I just did business because I was interested in it. I did some accounting units, I did some marketing units, I did some economics, I did some economic history, and got a job with the National Australia Bank as a SME analyst. So, and it was in the town that I was studying. It was in Armidale in northern New South Wales. And my boss was a month older than me, and we had, I don't know, 200 clients, and I think we had about 50 million bucks in lending, something like that. So we weren't playing with monopoly money, but it wasn't a big business by sort of the wider sense of the term. But it was enough to learn about how family businesses run. You know, you're watching, you know, there were trucking companies and supermarkets and pubs and caravan parks and stuff like that. Like, I think our biggest client might have been turning over, you know, 5 or 6 million bucks. It wasn't, but they were nice.
You're saying this was Armidale?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So again, it's kind of regional, but it's a hub in its own right. It's a pretty solid sized town.
Yeah, it was 25,000 people, and they were all, you know, there's a bit more to it than just farming.
Yep.
A lot of agriculture, but I wasn't involved in the agricultural lending.
Yeah.
But it was a solid education. I wasn't particularly good at the banking, but I enjoyed talking to the people, and I had this elderly.
Why doesn't that surprise me?
I had this elderly bloke call up one day, and he was sort of retired, but he still had some business with the bank, and he'd been a real sort of dynamo in his younger years. And he was waiting for the appropriate banker to get off the phone. And I was just talking with him, and I said, you know, blah, 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 what's happening? And he said, at the end of the phone call, I said, oh, you know, my colleague's ready to speak with you. I'll put you through. And he goes, well, Clayton, it's been lovely talking with you. I think you would have made an excellent agribusiness banker, which I think was his way of saying, you're a nice bloke, but I don't think you're a very good banker. Which is not to take anything away from agri bankers, but they have a different style altogether. They have a different style. So yeah, I only lasted about 18 months in the bank. The bank was very tolerant of me because I'm just not cut out for corporate life. I didn't know it at the time. When I got in the bank, I was like, well, you beauty, I'll be warm and dry for the rest of my career, because I'd worked in bottle shops and servos and all sorts of weird places by that point. And 18 months later, I hated it.
You know, it is funny how, you know, whether it's nature or nurture, I actually think it's more nature, how some of us are born with an inclination that plays itself out for your whole life. By the time I was 19, I knew I wanted to be self-employed. I was living in London, and there was a series that came out in the newspaper, like a magazine that came with the newspaper, and it was about how to start your own business. And I didn't end up doing that for another 2 decades, probably. But it was always there. It was always this kind of need, this driving force, a little bit like, and I was never cut out for corporate. I worked in corporate, but I've never been cut out for corporate. My husband is mechanically minded. You could not put him in a suit if you tried. I mean, we're going to a wedding this weekend, and it's in the bush. I don't think we'll get him in a suit for that. In fact, for that one, I don't think anyone's going to be in a suit, but even for for any, you know, it's just not his calling. I really wondered to what degree we're kind of born with a purpose. You know, we're born with certain natural skills and talents. My son is, between you and me, he doesn't even know this, is getting an award tonight that's like to do with online art design, like design and art. Like, he's got that's not an artistic bone anywhere in our family, you know, and he is getting an award for this thing that he's completely self-taught. I'm like, what is that? That, you know, were really adaptable. Again, my husband's really good with the kind of stuff you're talking about, the mechanical stuff and the making things work and just figuring things out and adapt, improvise, and overcome, as he always says. And it's never pretty, but it's always functional, you know?
It keeps the show on the road, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you grow up in a house with self-employment?
No, look, my dad did many years later. So he probably moved into self-employment when I was, or into partnership at least, when I was in my late teens, early 20s. But no, I didn't grow up around self-employment at all.
That you just knew, huh, when you were a young adult?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good
There's
point.
something to it. You can't deny yourself for very long. You know,
No.
you could tell yourself, okay, there's pressure on me from somewhere to be a doctor or an astronaut or a garbage man, or it doesn't really matter, but someone might be pushing you in a certain direction, and it's just not your cup of tea at all. And it just won't work.
Just doesn't, does it?
It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I've stopped, what am I, 43 years old? Yeah, 43. And
had to stop and think about that.
Oh, look, it gets away, doesn't it? No, it gets away. Yeah. I'm that age where I need to stop and think about it. You know, yeah. But I now know enough about the world to know that you can't grow a penguin where you should be growing a pineapple. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I don't know how to narrow down what any one person should think about for a career or a vocation or even a calling. I don't know, but I certainly don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up. But there's something to finding your mission or being able to listen to your heart. I don't know how to do it, but there's certainly something to it.
Sometimes it becomes clear over time. You know, you realise that you're constantly drawn to this area or constantly drawn to that area, and so for some people it unfolds, and for some people I reckon they've got a really clear idea from really young. But I think that's the smaller percentage of us.
Maybe there's an unmet opportunity in like browser history analysis, because if we all if you just Google the things you're interested in, and then I'm sure over time we'll be able to feed that into some AI, and they'll be like, well, you should clearly be a crochet knitting crocheter or something.
Yeah, that's right. Horrifying.
Asking questions of the world around you is so it's like fuel. I have trouble. I know people who are very single-minded, and I'm sort of in awe of them sometimes because they're so driven to do the thing.
Yeah.
And I've never known what the thing was. So when I show up to work, it doesn't matter what I did, whether I was working in a pub or working in a bank, I showed up and I worked hard. I wasn't necessarily always super effective, but I was always had my mind on the job and I was doing what I could to the best of my ability. But others will just, what do they say? Push stuff uphill with a toothpick if that's what it takes. Like, it's something to be. You see a powerful individual doing what they need to do. It's a thing to behold. It's good.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? So anyway, we're at the NAB. That didn't last, and you. I got to tell you a small funny story actually about the NAB. I worked for the NAB in London. So I did similar thing to you, the great Aussie backpack around Europe and stopped in the UK and worked. And I ended up working for the NAB over there. And it was at the time when they were being run by the CEO, Nobby Clark. And during that time, they also took over the National Irish Bank. So you've got the NAB and the NIB run by the Knob. was the inside joke at the time. Anyway, let's come back to it. So you left the NAB, but you're back in regional New South Wales. You're in Armidale.
In Armidale, I met a girl.
Yeah, as you do.
And then I quit the bank. I came home. We hadn't been living together very long. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I quit. And she's like, you quit your job? What are we going to do? So I thought I was in my 32 by that point, 30, maybe 30. And I went back to the farm. Mum and Dad were getting on, and getting labour in the bush is a perennial struggle. And I could help them, and they, I didn't have anything else to do, and I knew I didn't want to work in an office. I was done with offices. That was never going to be a part of my working life again. So I went back to the farm, and my now wife, God bless her cotton socks, she followed me, and she's a psychologist. So she was living in this tiny little town trying to offer psychological services to a person at 2:00 and then see them in the milk aisle of the supermarket 3 hours later. That wasn't going to last very long. And so
but I tell you what, our farmers need it. Gee, tough time. And I think it's becoming, is it true to say that farmers are becoming a little bit more accepting of that need and that support?
I think generally they are. At least everybody knows the phrase mental health now. How it's truly accepting.
Right. Which they didn't then necessarily, or certainly not when you were growing up. Maybe by the time we got back out there, but
My grandfather's generation, half of them were war veterans. Like they were carrying immense traumatic loads. And I don't know that they would have had much help. They might have helped each other at RSL clubs or the pub or whatever, but there was no, I don't think anyone knew what a psychologist was in 1950.
Of course, yeah.
Certainly not in a town of 3,000 people that's surrounded by wheat. Like it was just, it wasn't going to happen. Look, they're getting better at it, and but it was too small a town, so we left again, and my wife grew up in England, and she came to Australia as a young adult. And when we decided to leave Tondo, we sort of thought, where do we want to live? And we didn't take anything off the table. We considered everywhere in the world. We didn't want to live in a big city because we'd both done that and didn't love it. So we picked Orange. We whittled down a lot of places. We had the conversation for probably 6 months, and we chose Orange.
Why? Based on?
Pardon?
Based on what?
The right size, the right climate, a vibrant economy, good education sector, good health sector, proximity to a big city. We're 2 or 2.5 hours, probably 3 hours from Sydney.
Yeah.
And all the services that offers, and people want to visit this town. It has a very strong tourist industry.
Yeah.
So and it's strong financially. Like the economic activity here is very strong and very diverse. So
is it? So when you say diverse in terms of agriculture, so agriculture and mining?
Agriculture, mining, health, education, tourism. There's digital activity here. There are companies here that only work online.
Right. Okay.
So there's a lot happening here for a place. I think there's 40,000 people, give or take, here. But there's a lot happening here. It's really cooking. Yeah.
I'm going to have to come visiting. I'm trying to think. You're out west of.
West of Sydney.
West of Sydney. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's like 250 k's from Sydney Airport.
Yeah. Okay.
It's very high. It's quite cool here. So the town's like 800 meters above sea level.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of wine, a lot of good food. We grow truffles.
Oh, I'm in.
Yeah. Like it's pretty easy to sell. It's pretty easy to sell. Yeah.
All right. So you land in Orange, and now you got to figure out what you're going to do to make a buck.
Yeah. Well, Anna was straight into psychology. She knew what she was going to do, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I was sort of thinking mature age apprenticeships. But I started mowing lawns and the tail started wagging the dog. And so I was a gardener and lawn, I mowed lawns and did people's gardens for 8 years. And the whole time I was trying to build the thing. I put a little team together. Actually, they were based in Kiev, the poor guys, to build a computer guided lawnmower. So because I couldn't get labour, so I was trying to use technology to replace labour, and so I was trying to teach a robot to drive my lawnmower, like a big sort of commercial ride-on, and I didn't get that project very far, but I learned a lot doing it. Like you can pull a team together online with a credit card like pretty quick. It's really quite amazing what what you can do now. And I didn't know anything about the technology. Like I sort of auditioned people on Upwork. I'd send them little electronic tasks and make them, and then I said, look, I want a compass to light up some lights, and then in reaction to the compass moving, and then I want you to draw diagrams, and I'll build it here to test it. And I built it, and it worked. I'm like, all right, you look like my guy. How would you do this? And I had 3 guys in Ukraine building hardware for me.
Wow.
Like we couldn't get it going. It was not marketable. We were probably, I don't know, too early, or the technology is not far enough. The bits we were using, we couldn't buy clever enough computers on Alibaba to make it work.
Right.
What it was. So, but that was fun. It was interesting.
Really interesting.
And then 2019 was a terrible, terrible drought in Eastern Australia. It was all the fires. Half of the Blue Mountains was alive.
I remember that.
And I couldn't. The gardens were all dead. We were banned from watering gardens.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't. I couldn't make any money.
Of course. Right.
And I spoke to a guy who said, look, the mine out the road is looking for someone. Like my employer is looking for someone. It's not very glamorous work, but it's quite well paid. And I was like, well, what is it? And I sat down with them and went out to the gold mine. I've been out there for 3 years.
So it's an open cut mine?
No, I was open cut. They have a pit there, but it's no longer in production. It's underground now.
Right. Okay.
The resources out there, they're taking them from about 12 to 1,400 meters in depth from the surface.
Yeah.
And there's, like, I was a hippie sort of a gardener. I didn't really want to go out there, but I needed to feed myself, and I had a young family by that point, so I really had to do something. And I don't mind telling you, I was terrified going underground the first time. Like it was,
right.
It was frightening. Submarines, tunnels, that kind of stuff. I don't like being a long way from the fresh air,
Yeah.
Well, I didn't at that point. And I just put my.
And are you going down like in a lift or?
No, in a car. We're just getting a Land Cruiser.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
And it would be like a 20-minute drive from the last time you see the sun.
Yeah.
It'd be like a 20-minute drive to work from the top. And then I just worked in a workshop. There were just mechanics, we call them fitters, but they were just mechanics repairing and maintaining, loaders and trucks and stuff. And I emptied the bins, and I washed the machines. They get filthy, like they get really, so I just hit them with a high pressure hose before the mechanics went to work on them.
Yeah.
I did that for 6 months, and I learned a lot. I got over my fear of being underground, and I really started to like it. There's an attitude.
What did you like about it?
I liked the teamwork, and I liked the personalities.
Yeah.
Well, these are really, really tough people. Most of them are men. There are some women. There's no barriers to women there. Sure. If you can hold your own, you're welcome. But they are mentally tough. Yeah. Mentally tough people. It's a tough job. Everything's heavy. It's often very hot.
Yeah.
And you've got that. There's always a little ember in the back of your mind that if someone makes a mistake you might never have met, and you actually don't know anything about the task they're completing, but you've got to rely that they're doing it well enough to avoid really hurting someone or hurting a lot of people.
So there's a lot of relying on one another and trust involved. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you don't really talk about it, but
it's just a given.
It's just a given, yeah. And everyone's everyone is focused, and sort of the default setting is aggression. Everybody is very the only way to achieve anything is to throw yourself full forward into it. There's certainly politeness and professionalism, but there's no doubt that if you want something done, you've got to make it happen yourself.
Yeah.
Because everyone else is busy doing something else.
Yeah, right.
And at the start of the day, there's a list. It's usually a sheet. Clayton, you've got to do this, and Barry, you've got to do that, and you know, Sarah, you've got to do that, and then you're responsible for making whatever's beside your name happen that day. And you might get down there and there's no tools, or the machine's not there, or none of the pieces are in place, and you've got to pull it all together and make it happen by the end of the shift. And that is, it sounds strange to say, but it's kind of fun because I mean, and the characters, like, you've got to be a little bit crazy to want to work down there. Like, there's plenty of people with, you know, a whole spectrum of questionable tattoo choices and backgrounds and recreations and personality quirks. Like, everyone's a little bit nuts, but it's what makes it fun. All of them are there's a self-selection process that, you know, people who don't like it, they just don't come back.
Yeah.
And you grow to kind of, how do you say it? You grow a respect amongst one another that is hard to, I've never seen it in anything else. I've done some tough jobs with some tough people, but underground mining is, it's a unique calling, that's for sure.
It's almost sounding like a kind of war front. You know, it's sounding like the experiences of soldiers in, you know.
Yeah, look, that's right. Like, it's a tough job, and you're in a team, and it's a tight knit team.
Each other.
And there's a vernacular language, and there's a kind of an unspoken code, and there's a culture. And I think, I've never been in the military, but I'd imagine that there's great overlap in aspects of life underground to life in the military. Yeah.
Interesting stuff. And I'm hearing yet again, weirdly, this theme that seems to be coming through a few of, and this is at an extreme level what you're describing, but one of the themes coming through again with these few interviews that I've done so far is around self-reliance, and being able to get on with things, taking responsibility, figuring out how to do stuff yourself. So I guess it goes with the independent thinking, but there's something about kind of independent action and just doing what needs to be done and figuring out what needs to be done and not expecting anyone else to sort your life out for you.
No. Look, I think that when you first learn, when you're on your first, you know, the early stages of your Bitcoin journey, that the whole idea that there's no hotline to call if something goes wrong. Like, if you've got cold storage, you're self-custodial, and you know there's something goes wrong, it's all you. You're on your Pat Malone.
And as I was chatting about with the last gentleman that I interviewed, you know, that thing of the journey of coming to Bitcoin is also a very solo journey, like figuring out what it is, how it fits into the universe, and then going down that rabbit hole. There's influencers in the space who kind of encourage and support and education and infuse you, you know, and inspire. But really, ultimately, 90% of it is you and your books and you're reading about the world and kind of piecing it all together and going, what the, you know?
And ultimately, you've got to read, you know, at some point you sit on the fence and you read and you learn and you read and you learn and you watch videos and you might meet people or you meet them online, whatever it is. And at some point you think, am I going to put my hard earnings into this? Like, am I going to go step off,
Yeah.
take some fiat, which I know I can buy bread and milk with, and put it into this mythical internet money. And you either do or you don't.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely. And there's nobody around you encouraging you, suggesting it. In fact, quite the opposite.
Yeah, that's right. Quite the opposite.
And you've got to have the courage of your convictions. So, you know, to the degree within the risk profile that you feel comfortable with, you know, it's not an all or nothing prospect. So take me down your Bitcoin journey then.
I was aware of Bitcoin when I was at uni, the second time around. And I remember, I don't know when it was, but it was very early. And I remember thinking, because I was quite fascinated with precious metals and the inflation hedge there. And I remember thinking, look, if this thing takes off, there's a massive upside here. I remember thinking I should put $50 in this, and I think they might have been 10 cents each. Like they weren't $1 each. Bitcoin weren't $1 each. It was really early, but the custodial, the self-custody, and there was no sexy user interface. It wasn't like
it was difficult to buy and it was difficult to self-store. I mean, I had trouble enough because I'm not terribly technically capable. Even just a year and a half ago, I started to get into this, and me trying to work out how to use my cold storage for the first time. And then that wait from the time that you're transferring. Completely shit myself.
Yeah.
Like waiting for it to go off the exchange onto my wallet. I'm like that few minutes.
Terrifying, nerve-wracking. Yeah. So that was. I was aware of it then, and I didn't jump. I didn't have the money. I was a student. I was living very close to the bone, but I was aware of it. And then I saw a Time magazine somewhere, and I think Bitcoin hit maybe $200 or $300 or something. There was that first little pump.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, wow, I should have bought some of that. You know, I could have really helped right now. And then
I missed the boat at $200, $300.
Yeah, that's right. And then I went on with my life, and it popped up on my digital radar every few years. And then my brother, it was by the time it hit maybe high 12 or 15,000 US, I sort of thought, oh well, I've missed the boat, because I remembered thinking at college I should have put $50 into this, and I thought, well, this is clearly gone now. Like the horse is absolutely bolted. I'm not going to bother about it. And my brother emailed me from Vietnam. He was on holiday, and he said, there's this thing called Bitcoin. He'd just been working incredibly hard for a year. He'd done an enormous year in a gas plant. He was living in Melbourne and working in Western Australia, and it just sucked the life out of him. He was working 26 days on and 9 days off. And he did that for 12 months, and he saved a heap of money.
Yeah,
like a considerable nest egg behind him in his mid-30s.
And there's nothing to spend it on over there.
No, not
except the local pub.
Yeah, he saved it. Like he saved it all. He's pretty frugal, and then he took a year off. And by the end of the year, there was quite a lot less money left. And he went to Vietnam because it was cheap, and he'd never been there. And he was talking to some Canadian folk who were they worked in IT, and he was just having a beer with them at some random bar in Vietnam, and they're like, "You've got to get on this Bitcoin thing, man." And he got orange pilled, and he emailed me. He goes, "Look, Vietnam have banned cryptocurrency. There's this thing called Bitcoin, and I'm going to send you some money, and I want you to buy it for me." I was like, "Oh, I've heard of it, but I don't know what I'm doing." He goes, "Look, man, just figure it out and just buy a little bit first, like buy $10 worth first, and then we'll know that it works and we can store it.
Yeah.
And then make the big purchase." I'm like, all right, what price? He goes, just whatever the spot is, just buy it. So I bought, $10 worth and transferred it into a wallet, and there it was. I'm like, okay, well, we did that. And then he gave me some thousands of dollars, and I bought a chunk of Bitcoin for him. And I think, I don't remember the price, but it really doesn't matter. He ended up with, a big piece of one Bitcoin. It wasn't a whole Bitcoin, but he got a good chunk of the Bitcoin. And that really sparked me then, because I knew that he was then pretty much out of money. He had to go back to work, but that he had this asset that was so volatile. And he had no tertiary financial education whatsoever. Like, I'd been to uni, but he hadn't. He'd been in trades and stuff. I'm like, what do you know about this? Why are you buying this? And he said, well, he just thinking about Bitcoin, and he understood how gold bullion works. He's like, it's just like gold bullion. Like, it's going to have a value no matter what. Like, it'll always be worth so much oil, or so much wheat, or so much meat, or so much water. Like, you can skip the fiat currency in the middle, and if you want to buy, a mob of sheep, you can give someone a bar of gold, and they'll give you so many sheep, and they can take their gold away, and it'll be forever tradable. But Bitcoin is like that, but you can send it online, and no one can take it from you. And I was like, all right, and he goes, and it's limited. There'll never be more than 21 million of them. I said, you can't hack it, or you can't invent them, or you can't, isn't some boffin somewhere hacking more Bitcoin out of nothing? He goes, no, the math stands up. I don't know the math, but smarter people than you and I trust the math, and some clever people are putting millions of dollars into this. I'm like, all right, I need to do more homework. So
did he get most of this from the Canadians he'd been chatting with, or did he then sort of go down the rabbit hole himself and start studying, learning? So
yeah, he got enough to get the fire ignited by the Canadians, but he went and did a lot of reading after that.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
And he continues.
So he orange pilled you.
Pardon?
So he orange pilled you.
Yeah, he was. He was a big part of it. I trusted him, and I knew that he had only my best interest. He wasn't trying to get anything from me. I have a good relationship with my brother, and he thought it was a good thing for him, and he said he thought it would be a good thing for me. So he's like, look, just see what you think. If it's not for everyone, and I thought about it for months, and then as you get further into communities online that are au fait with Bitcoin, and you start to see the different tribes and stuff, and don't let me put anyone off learning about Bitcoin, like any community. Like, there are different factions and different tribes in any online community, whether you're collecting Pokemon cards or Ferraris, but there's different tribes, so don't get worried about that. But I could just start to see, there were legacy financial people who were interested in it, and there were hackers and makers and artists and all sorts of eclectic weirdos that were into it as well, and they all had this one thing in common. And there was the legacy media was saying things like it's only used for selling drugs online or any other nefarious activity you care to mention. And sure, there's that, but there's been plenty of drugs change hands for US dollars as well, so that didn't really bother me either.
Cash is much less transparent than Bitcoin. Cash is the choice of criminals. It's
easy to get rid of and easy to use. Yeah, everyone understands it, but Bitcoin is, it's an ultimate. If you want to make a large transaction, I've never used a Lightning Network. That's my next kind of learning curve. I buy small amounts of Bitcoin regularly, and I have a decades-long timeline. Like, I'll probably never use it. It'll be my kids and my grandkids. That end up using my Bitcoin. So whether it's 80,000 Australian or 10,000 Australian, I'm just chipping away every so often.
Yeah.
So it doesn't bother me. But if you want to make a big transaction, I wouldn't buy my coffee with it. Although Lightning may change that.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to buy a farm or buy an island or something, it's the perfect means of exchange for that. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
unreal. Yeah.
I'm curious about, there's a lot of development going on Lightning at the moment, is my understanding. And I think, do you know Lynn Alden?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think she's just about to release a paper on it. I heard her interviewed on What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormack just recently. And she's really delving deep into Lightning Network. And Peter McCormack was saying that he's been over to El Salvador probably 4 or 5 times now. And I mean, he got into Bitcoin probably, well, certainly much earlier than I did. And I don't know, possibly yourself too. But I'm sure he's stacked.
Yeah,
it
sounds the language he uses. He said, yeah, I think he's probably got a fair bag. Yeah.
He was saying that this last time in El Salvador, so he's always been buying stuff with Bitcoin over there. He said it is more seamless now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And that's just using the Strike app. And so I'm curious because things may develop more quickly than we imagine. I'm with you. I seem to have this very long, I'm thinking minimum 10 years, minimum 10-year hold. You're thinking further out than that. But I'm thinking stack as much as I can, particularly at these current prices, dare I say. And, I suppose I'm just looking towards my husband's and my retirement and my son's university years and getting him started maybe with property or something, that's kind of, so I still feel like I'm short-term thinking if I'm thinking 10 to 15 years ahead. But, by that stage, Lightning may be much, like a lot happens in 10 years in technology and particularly in this space.
Have you ever spent much time in Africa?
What's that? Sorry?
Have you ever spent much time in Africa?
No, I haven't. It's actually the one continent I've never been to, and I'd like to. I'd like to. My husband's less enthusiastic. Yeah.
I spent a month in Malawi in 2013, and most people in sub-Saharan Africa are going to miss 20th century banking altogether. They're going to go from agrarian barter to Web3 transfer of value directly. And the reason they're going to do that is because some of the big mobile phone networks in Africa, Kenya springs to mind, the phone credit has been a means of value exchange for probably a decade or more now. So if you're at the market and you've been growing mangoes and you want to buy some chickens, then you sell your mangoes for phone credit or the local currency. But if you don't have currency on you and you just topped up your phone, you can send your friend, an hour of phone credit and they might give you some chickens for that. And there's a lot of people who are very comfortable with using phone credit as a means of exchange.
Is that a fact? Wow.
Yeah. And Africa is going to blow up. When Africa gets onto Lightning, the adoption is going to be fast.
Well, the Central Republic of Africa, is it? Has already.
No, well, I think just the broader sub-Saharan Africa. I don't know what's going on in like the northern Africa, like from Morocco to Egypt. I've never been there.
Yeah.
But my sister-in-law grew up in Ghana.
Yeah.
And she and my brother-in-law spend a lot of their time in Africa. He works there. He grew up in England, but he's worked much of his career for NGOs in Africa, and he's got quite a sort of a finger on the pulse as to what happens, Ghana, Nigeria, and he lived in Malawi for a long time. We were there visiting them for Christmas, and he showed us a lot of Malawi, and there's a lot of people with fierce entrepreneurial energy that are going to, they have, most of them have very little in Malawi. Most people have very, very little. But in the next generation, they're all going to want a bar fridge, an air conditioner, a motor scooter, and they've all got cheap Android phones, and that it's just coming quickly, and they have a distrust of centralized authority, a lot of them, because so many like the rule of law in a lot of parts of Africa has got a spotty history, to say the least. So you trust your neighbours, you trust your family, and you do business in a way that doesn't require trust beyond that. So exchange of value at the point of sale. I don't know that many small businesses in Africa would offer terms unless they had a long relationship with the counterparty. But just small businesses, because they're unbanked. Like, the Malawian kwacha, when I was there, 200 Australian dollars translated to a wad of cash like 3 inches thick. So if you don't have a bank and you go and sell a big asset, you want to go and buy a rice mill or something, that might cost $2,000 in Australia, you're going to have a real trouble storing that, because you've got nowhere to keep it. You've got no bank account. But if you can keep, a Lightning wallet, then you are off to the races. It's going to change a lot of lives, and that news will travel fast. And if I saw a heat map the other day of new Lightning nodes, and Southern South America and Africa, Central Africa was blowing up. Yeah.
Amazing. And they are going to be the first continents to recognize the value. It just makes sense for them.
Of course it does.
As you say, it's the unbanked, it's the human rights, it's having just not being able, when you're used to a corrupt government who can take your fiat, you're going to look for an alternative much faster than we are in the West.
Or you have a government you can't trust that wants to shut bank accounts. We've seen that in the developed world in the recent history. So
a funny thought just occurred to me as you were talking. I mean, I don't know when it's going to be, but at the moment here we are doing this little podcast called Bitcoin People, and it feels like a Bitcoin community, and we feel quite kind of niche and a little bit alone in our journey, as we've just been talking about. And soon enough, it's just going to be, it would be like calling yourself the internet community.
That's right.
Widespread, global, and we're no longer the community that we think of ourselves as now. And that's the point, isn't it? And then we'll have to go off and find other hobbies, because then it's just currency.
Let me ask you something. Do you have any friends in real life, in your community, in your networks in Melbourne, that you socialize with or you work with that have any real affinity with Bitcoin? Do you know anyone who's a Bitcoiner?
None until 3 weeks ago, speaking of Twitter and Twitter community, so I said to someone on Twitter, they were a Bitcoiner and they were clearly Australian, and I went, "Oh, are you in Melbourne? I'm looking for people to meet up with here, would love a coffee." And he went, "No, I'm in Adelaide. Did you know there's a Melbourne Bitcoiners group?" And I went, "No." And I've looked for it on the Meetup website, and the best I'd come across was a crypto thing, and I'd gone to that, but there were people shilling their own thing, and it just didn't feel like my people. And lovely people, but didn't feel like what I was there for. And he said that, and he provided me, I think he told me, look up on Telegram. And he might have sent me the link, or maybe I just looked it up, and literally they were having a meetup that week. And it's 2 weeks ago, and I've just met my first fellow Bitcoiners in Melbourne, and we've got another meetup in about another 2 weeks time or something, 2-3 weeks time. So
wow.
I'm finally, and then I've connected with a couple of them on Twitter, and so I'm hoping to build, but I've been really alone up till this point.
And what brought you to this point? How did you start to become interested in Bitcoin?
Are you flipping the table?
Hey man, it's good for the goose.
So my story was that a girlfriend of mine who's a nurse got into crypto, made a fortune. So I got in, she's just bought her, she's a single mum, 2 boys. One of her boys was best friends with my son through primary school. And she got into it, and she's just bought her dream house. And
Wow.
so I got in when I lost my business through lockdowns, just looking for an alternate source of income or growth, if not income. And then, you know, one thing led to another, and here we are.
It's a different
Running a
journey for
Bitcoin
everyone.
People podcast.
Yeah.
Whilst my business is somewhat back up and running, albeit sort of a bit spluttery and stoppy and starty and all of that stuff, because it's kind of really, it's never taken the size of break that it did in the last 2 years.
Yeah. A lot of people have had a big reset in the last couple of years. It's given a lot of people massive cause for thought and reassessment. I think it's been really hard for a lot of folks. Yeah.
And talk about Bitcoin finding its moment, because I think a lot of people like me have found it because either they ended up looking for alternate sources of income through that period of time, or they saw things like what went on for the Canadian truckers and for the Russian sanctions, you know, or the freezing of the Russian funds. So you see stuff like that, and you start to explore, you know, that self-custodianship.
Yeah.
So let's just come back to you for a moment. And so this is where you went down that rabbit hole. So for you, it's very much about the long term. It's about your kids and your grandkids. It's about intergenerational wealth. And for you, it's about NGU technology. It's about number go up over the long period of time.
Look, it's not even that. As a student of economic history, it's the other number go down. I can't see a fiat currency that's based on fractional reserve not going to zero on a long enough timeline. It's got 100% failure rate.
Yeah.
I had an incredible history teacher in high school, and we did Europe in the 20th century for my year 12, and watching Germany, I've lived in Germany, I lived in Munich for a year, and to watch Germany go from a really strong economic position to the depths of hyperinflation.
It's been a powerhouse since the Second World War.
Yeah. And then back again, and just to watch what reparations in Weimar Germany and money printing did to a really sensible, rational, logical national mindset, just destroyed the economy. And I was like, well, if it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone. And lo and behold, you know, since 2008, I joined the NAB 3 days before Lehman Brothers fell over. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really quite serious. You know, I was getting phone calls from friends going, oh my God, you've been banking for 3 days. What have you done?
I'll tell you another funny parallel in our stories. I joined NAB 6 weeks before the 87 crash.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was thinking, you know, last in, first out, but I actually got to ride it out and kind of watch that. And I was in London at the time, so I was kind of watching it unravel in Europe. And so I've got a real kind of strong sense of crashes and you know, I mean, there were just appalling things that happened to people in the financial markets. There was a lot of suicide, but then outside of that, how it affected the broader community, the ripple effect of something like that, or the Lehman Brothers, or the tech bubble, or the 2008, you know, subprime mortgage, like you name it. They ripple throughout. So what's your sense of how, for want of a better word, how Bitcoin fixes this? Are you looking at, you're obviously concerned about hyperinflation and what's going on in Germany, of all places right now. Like, I find it just fascinating that it appears to have come full circle. What's your kind of sense of the uptake? So I can hear you're thinking about it being taken up in kind of South America and Africa as a starting point. What's your sense of if or how it could transition in the West? And then what are you hoping or expecting it could transition to or become in the future, which is a pretty big, loaded double question.
Well, I think the less comfortable you are, the more you're going to look for change.
Yeah.
So the people with the least at the moment are going to be looking for the greatest opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you are unbanked and you're cobbling together some small business on the side of the road and you can accept payments and store value more effectively,
yeah,
you're going to adopt that, particularly if you see people around you having success with it.
yeah,
So I think it will be fast in the developing world and in places that have been developed or are developed and are facing imminent crisis. You know, Argentina springs to mind, Venezuela, because not only can you conduct business easily with a Lightning Network, but you can also pick up every skerrick of value you have and stick it in your pocket or carry some numbers and words in your mind and walk across a border.
yeah.
You know, you can teach a 5-year-old to recite 12 words.
Yeah.
And they can carry value. So if you are worried about local authorities, wherever they may be, or you're worried about accepting payment with a legacy gateway, whether that be Visa or banking or whatever, then I think those types of people are going to adopt it faster.
Yeah.
On the flip side of the same coin, the more comfortable you are, the less you're going to try to change where you are. So my neighbours are very happy with Visa and MasterCard and instant transfer, Osco banking.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not looking for value transfer solutions because they don't have a problem transferring value.
Yeah.
What they use to store value and to hedge against inflation is another thing. And I don't think Australia is going to face the worst inflation that the developed world is going to face in the next 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to make life uncomfortable for some people, for sure.
Yep.
How quickly they adopt Bitcoin, it depends on the personal risk tolerance that an individual has. I suppose that's a big part of it, you know, dealing with uncertainty. How comfortable you can get with no backup plan. You know, no backup services. You know, if your bank account gets shut down, you can call the bank. We don't have that in Bitcoin.
Mm.
It will also depend on government and policy toward Bitcoin, because governments have a lot to lose with widespread adoption of cryptocurrency. And I think I can see headwinds when central bank digital currencies are widely implemented.
Yeah.
I think the off ramps out of Bitcoin and out of crypto is going to be, it has the potential to be particularly sticky.
Yeah.
I do think about that. I don't know how to mitigate against it.
No.
But what are we getting for a term deposit? You know, if you've got $1 million and you want to give it to a bank for 12 months, you might get 3%. So you're going to go backwards. So I'm happy to accept the risk. I don't have $1 million worth of Bitcoin, but what savings I do have that I don't need for the next 3 years, I'm holding in Bitcoin just as an inflation hedge, and it's not earning anything. I don't have it staked, or I'm not trying to do anything clever with it. It's just under my proverbial bed.
Yeah.
Just as an inflation hedge, and that seems to be, you know, that I may end up coming out of that better. Well, I'm certainly going to come out of it better than if I held in Australian dollars at some point.
Yeah. For sure.
What the developed world's adoption of Bitcoin, I think, will be largely guided by big financial institutions. Like if your bank starts recommending, or your financial advisor, or you see it in the financial press, you know, as an investment option, and it's widely considered as a very real and practical solution, to a problem that you might have. You know, you want to buy, you know, an equity index, or you want to buy some other financial investment instrument, then okay. And Bitcoin, if Bitcoin can easily join that list in the public mind, then that will be a big adoption thing. But if, you know, people in Canberra and Washington and London start pushing central bank digital currencies, then it's going to be a real headwind.
Yeah.
And central bank digital currencies are deeply concerning because you can program the money, and that's if it's always a benevolent government that's controlling it, then it'll be okay and there's some benefit. But if I can imagine a point where if you tweet something nasty and an algorithm gets pinged by that, then, and you have your capacity to spend your money on what you want limited by on the strength of that tweet, then that's a really nasty place to find yourself in.
Yeah.
And I think there are governments in office right now around the world that would do that if they had the technological capability. And I think we're starting to see that more and more.
Yeah. I'd agree, and I think again, many of us in the Bitcoin community are very concerned about that, and the level of control that can be leveraged. And that may be another reason. And you're right, it's the on and off ramps that become problematic. But there's always, have you read The Sovereign Individual?
I haven't read it.
It's a really worthwhile read. But this idea that there's always going to be somewhere in the world you can go. So that's my kind of idea, is that there's going to be somewhere where I can go, where that's going to be. And as you say, I only have to remember my 12 or 24 word seed phrase. And but the thing is, even then, getting out of the country could be, I mean, recently we saw that they can slam the borders and you can't even get out of the city, let alone the country. You can't get out of your 5K zone. So anyway, that's not it's not something we're going to solve right here, right now. But to the degree that Bitcoin becomes a greater and greater means of exchange. See, the interesting thing is, I live in northeastern suburbs of Melbourne, and I went to a shopping centre recently and I saw a Bitcoin ATM there. So the adoption in the West, and my understanding is from what I'm seeing of regulators in the US, is they are wanting to regulate in order to make it more acceptable, more widespread. And the financial institutions, as you've already talked about, we've already got spot ETFs in Canada. They're forever talking about, and it'll happen eventually, a spot ETF in the US. Once the financial institutions are in, and they're already in. I was talking about this with one of the other guys that I was interviewing, like so many in the chapter 11 of Celsius recently. It had all these players who are creditors, and some of them were like the SEC. I know, right? And Californian Financial Protection Authority.
Wow.
So, you know, I don't know what they're invested in, whether it was just Bitcoin or whether it's altcoins, you know, but they're on this DeFi platform that then goes, you know, kaput overnight. But I think there's too much widespread adoption already.
Look, I find it hard to believe that, you know, like the Saudi royal family, there wouldn't be some renegade nephew somewhere there who's got a little nano ledger somewhere stuck in the bottom drawer. I find it hard to believe that the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is not aware of it. If not, they're not sneaking a little bit quietly into some deep, dark filing cabinet somewhere, because the price is so attractive. Once you understand that the supply is limited and the demand is only a fraction of it's only a fraction of what it one day probably will be.
Yeah,
it's hard to ignore it if you're a professional money manager. Like it's really hard to ignore it. Okay, there are legislative issues to work around, but I find it hard to believe that they're not. Well, if I had a considerable net worth and my investment managers weren't at least thinking about Bitcoin, I think I'd fire them.
Yeah.
And
the demand is coming from them. It's why a lot of financial institutions are wanting to create kind of ETFs or managed funds in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
That include Bitcoin, because you're right, it's the high net worth individuals who are demanding it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like 5 years ago, no one outside of America had heard of Michael Saylor.
Yeah.
But you can't deny that he's a clever guy.
Yeah.
I think he did something at MIT, and he's built a big company, which is not easy to do. Not many people build a company the size he's built. He's clearly a smart guy.
Yeah.
And he is a logical guy. He's trained in computer programming, and he's got a lot of smart people with him. And not one of them has stood up and said, this is a good reason why we shouldn't be involved in this.
Yeah.
And I see people that have vastly more experience managing wealth and growing wealth than I do. And they're all smarter than me. And I see them talking about it and thinking about it, and some of them are investing in it, some of them are not public about their investments, but I find it hard to believe they don't have some.
Yeah.
And it will continue to snowball. And you don't need to be you don't need to be very clever, but a search engine will show you adoption curves on fax machines and telephones and televisions and commercial aviation and the internet and mobile phones with 3G and 4G. Like, the curves just get steeper.
Yeah, there's that S-curve, isn't it? It's like that sort of trickle and then really fast and then a bit of trickle off at the end.
Yeah.
I heard a stat recently that the uptake of Bitcoin is faster than the internet at a similar stage, same number of years, not as fast as mobile phones. So faster than the internet, not quite as fast as mobile phones, but the adoption is really kind of getting there, which is enormously hopeful, I think, for everybody. And my understanding is that something I heard about the US, and I think we need to finish up shortly because we've been going for quite some time, but I did hear that there was an idea that the CBDCs in the US, it might be only relevant at a certain level, and then they want to sort of cut it off. I don't know where I heard or saw this, kind of cut it off at a certain level of size of institution, but it wouldn't become relevant for individuals and the masses. So, yeah, I'll wait and see what actually happens there. I mean, as someone pointed out recently, it's very hard not to take up the opportunity for power when it's handed to you on a platter like a CBDC. How many humans could resist the temptation for how long, particularly if it's another generation of politicians coming through, someone's going to want to take on that level of control. But
it's hard not to get cynical sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like holding up a mirror and looking at your own dark side. Well, I would find it hard to not do that myself,
Valid comment. I think that's right. And I think it's very easy to point the finger, and it's easy to not be tempted by control when it's never been on offer to you.
Yeah. No, yeah. Kind of like a megalomaniac on the internet, but
Well, it's nice, I do like that, everybody gets a voice on to some pretty reasonable degree on Twitter, albeit, with bots and censorship and all sorts of things. Clayton, I've really, really enjoyed hearing your life story. What have we missed? Is there anything? I feel like it feels like quite an optimistic place to finish up on this kind of note of adoption and the fact that perhaps the toothpaste is out of the tube, and maybe it's too late for anything to really be frozen and we're on our way. Is there anything you want to kind of, a final thought, a final comment?
I would say to anyone who's new to Bitcoin that you should make a distinct separation in your mind between the broader cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin.
Yes.
There's a distinct difference there. Don't get confused, because there's a lot of also rans in that spectrum of products. And to keep reading. And on the same note, I would say that there are going to be some very useful altcoins in the future. I don't know what they are, but I think the blockchain in different ways is going to change a lot of digital life in the next 100 years. I don't know what forms they're going to take, but it's like the printing press was invented 20 years ago, and we're just starting to see the wider dissemination. I see, when people look back on this part of history from like 1990 to now, we'll see the internet and the development of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies almost at the same point. Now, I think they're going to grow together, and it's going to become a very, very complex entanglement of development, and that's exciting. But there's going to be a lot to learn for all of us, and I hope that people are brave enough to put a coffee's worth or a lunch's worth of money into it, just so they've got a little bit of skin in the game, and they can learn to see what it might do for them and for the wider community. It's exciting.
Wise words, wise words. And I think it's lovely that you've done this a couple of times throughout our chat, is focus on those people who might be new to Bitcoin. Let's encourage them. And I think that idea of a small amount of skin in the game has a lot going for it. Get in $10, $20, get off zero.
Yeah, get off zero.
Yeah, that's really the message, isn't it? Clayton, an absolute delight and a pleasure. I am so pleased I hassled hassled you to come on board. It's just been such a delightful journey hearing about your life and then your Bitcoin journey. And I'm going to finish up there, and I'll look forward to hopefully staying in touch as we go.
Thank you.
My thanks again for your time. Take good care.